My name is Tim Hill with GlobalData, and I'm going to be looking at the fine food sector in Asia Pacific as it recovers from the ravages of the pandemic. I'm going to be looking at both the food service sector as well as the retail sector. I'll also be doing a deep dive into which countries in Southeast Asia are most likely to spend large sums of money on premium foods, and within those countries, which demographics are the ones that are the biggest splurgers. So let me quickly do a share screen now to get into my opening slide. Fine food trends in the pandemic recovery phase, Asia Pacific. And spoiler alert, so if you want to turn your head away, if you don't want to be spoiled for what's going to come up, fine dining is set for a big growth spurt up to 2025, followed by a big drop-off with the pandemic. Asian consumers tend to be more enthusiastic about fine dining than consumers from other parts of the region. The consumers with the biggest appetites for fine foods are not necessarily the richest or the ones from the most affluent countries. It's not just the females that are foodies, but also millennial females do actually seem to dominate most categories, has to be said. The biggest generational splurgers are also not the ones with the biggest paychecks. So that's, I suppose, the key points we're going to be talking about. Let me just go into the framework we're going to be looking at. Fine food consumption patterns are part of one of the 8 mega trends that we track in GlobalData for it's the sensory and indulgence trend, which is the red line here. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So this is the train track, and the stations along the train track we've identified as novel and experimental, the experience economy, ethical luxury, authenticity and heritage, premiumization and indulgence, fresh and natural, and connoisseurship. And all of these trends lead in this context towards the consumption in the region of fine food. So we're going to be looking at these in a bit more detail to see how they impact the purchase of fine foods. The overview of the drivers and inhibitors. The drivers are variety-seeking tendencies, hedonistic consumption, the cross-fertilization of tastes and preferences, the age of connectivity, because of course during lockdown we've all been consuming far too much social media, and it hasn't always been good for us, as Facebook can attest to. Urbanization and economic development. Most Southeast Asian countries are now actually over 50% urbanized. The inhibitors for sensory and indulgence and the consumption of fine foods, economic circumstances. So again, the pandemic has caused a lot of hardship in a lot of countries. Choice overload, choice paralysis, when people have too much and they tend to gravitate towards the most established brands and flavors and fragrances. The growing anti-consumerism sentiment, it's seen as detrimental to sustainability goals to consume too much. The need gaps. Novel offerings can fail to satisfy some core consumer needs, and consumer conservatism and ingrained choices. So resistant to change, it's a normal response, especially as we will see in the older generations. Looking at the relevance of on the left-hand side, we've got the stations along the train track, and on the top, we've got various sectors within food, so food, non-alcoholic drinks, alcoholic drinks, and food service. And we can see there is a high relevance for all of these trends towards the food consumption sector. So looking at this in a bit more detail, from one of the consumer surveys that we did earlier this year, we asked whether people find somewhat or very appealing the following categories along the bottom. So rare, exotic ingredients or flavors, local ingredients or flavors, food, drink flavors inspired by other cultures or inspired by traditional meals or recipes, food or drinks with complex or multiple flavor combinations, and unusually colored food and drinks. And you can see what we've put here, of course, is the generations. So from the left, Gen Z, the young ones, up to the silent generation in orange on the right. And what we can see from this is that millennials are generally the most enthusiastic when it comes to reflecting on flavor preferences and interests. When it comes to openness to experiment with different types of products, again, by generation. And again, what we've done here is we've looked at different food sectors. We're going to be looking at these in a bit more detail later, but dairy, savory snacks, prepared meals and meal ingredients, chocolate, confectionery and desserts, hot drinks, soft drinks, and alcoholic drinks. And what we find here is particularly, it seems, the younger generations. Dairy is particularly prevalent with the Gen Z and the Gen Y, who seem to be the most interested in experiment. And it has to be said at this stage that the Gen Z really are actually, amongst the surveys for all of our country groups, really the lowest income earners of all. The boomers tend to be the highest income earners when we split it down by country. So we've got this paradox of the people that are not spending, they're not earning so much, actually spending a lot more on premium food and drinks. So how do these trends play out in Asia Pacific and particularly in Southeast Asia? First of all, in the food service sector. Nice picture here from Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. Notice that the table setting is just for two, which is the current pandemic restrictions in Singapore. So the good news is that fine dining restaurants, which can be seen by the graph on the right, are set for a bigger recovery than the quick service restaurants, which are shown in the graph on the left, from 2022. So looking at this by country, we've got Indonesia in light green going to Thailand. And what we see from this is that the recovery rate starting in 2022 for fine dining are higher in the ASEAN countries than they are for the quick service restaurants. Obviously, this is because the pandemic had a particularly strong impact on fine dining in 2020, 2021. When it comes to breaking out by ASEAN countries, Philippines and Thai consumers in particular, when asked what inspires you to try new flavors and fragrances, they say Philippines and Thai consumers in particular say they like to do it in fine dining restaurants. The global average for this was 39. You can see Philippines and Thailand well above that. When we asked this by generation, it was the Gen X, the Gen Y, and the boomers that like to try new flavors in fine dining restaurants. When we asked, do you likely to consider yourself a foodie? And Indonesian consumers said yes, overwhelmingly. Actually, more than double the global average, which was of 23%. Indonesians say that yes, we are call ourselves foodies, and way more so than the rest of the ASEAN region, obviously more so than Asia Pacific, which is at the bottom there. When we look at it by generation, though, it's the Gen Ys, the millennials, followed then by the Gen Zs, who more so than the Asia Pacific average, more so than the global average, more likely to call themselves foodies. But when we did a deep dive into it, we found particularly females aged 18 to 34, 42% of them, in fact, consider themselves foodies. And again, actually, females are not the higher income earners when we looked, did a deep dive in each of the countries. When we asked about trying out the newest flavors and fragrances, Indonesians overwhelmingly, more than double the global average of 20%, more than the Asia Pacific average, said yes, they like to try out the newest flavors and fragrances. By generation, it was the millennial generation, head and shoulders, followed then by Gen Z and then Gen Y. So let's have a look now at the retail sector. And we're going to have a look at which fine foods are the most popular in Southeast Asia's retail markets. Well, most Asian consumers, it seems, spend more than the Asia Pacific average on dairy foods, although the Vietnamese do seem particularly fond of spending more on it. The global average here was 90%. When we looked at it by generation, it was the millennials spending most. And then when we did a deep dive, it was 23% of Asia Pacific females, aged 25 to 44. So that's females going into the Gen X generation as well, that are particularly keen on premium dairy foods. Staying with the proteins, for fish and seafood, Malaysians seem to be slightly more interested in this than the rest of Southeast Asia, but generally ASEAN consumers, more so than Asia Pacific, do seem to be keen on premium sources of fish and seafood, and certainly more so than the global average, which was 17%. By generation, it's the millennials that followed actually by the Gen X that are most interested in premium sources of fish and seafood. Staying with proteins, for meat, most Asian consumers tend to buy premium meat. This is compared with Asia Pacific. We see Vietnam and Indonesia seem to be particularly keen on this. And by generation, it's the millennial generation that tend to be ones who want to buy from premium meat suppliers. But you can see that the Gen Zs are following up fairly close behind as well. And particularly both males and females in the age range of 25 to 34 were keen on this. For savory and deli foods, again, most Asian consumers seem to want to buy premium ones compared with the Asia Pacific average. But we can see here Vietnam and Thailand in particular seem to be keen on savory and deli foods. By generation, it's the millennials who are most keen. So that's 23, 24% APAC females aged 25 to 34 in particular. So we notice that the Gen Zs are following close behind. When it comes to premium savory snacks, compared with APAC average, what we've got here is most Asian respondents, again, compared with APAC average, interested in savory snacks. And by generation, it's millennials who are most interested, particularly both males and females, aged 25 to 34. For fresh bread and pastries, again, most Asian consumers seem to be keen on this. This is in-store bakery products. And millennials followed, you see, by Gen Z and then by Gen X, seem to be most keen on in-store bakery products. For premium bakery and cereals, Vietnam, Philippines, and Malaysia seem to be interested in buying premium. This is one where the Philippines actually pokes its head up in the leading, the top three, because prior to that, the Philippines hasn't been particularly keen on spending large amounts, not quite as conservative as Singapore appears to be there. You can see Singapore is really seems to be the least enthusiastic out of all the ASEAN countries here. By generation, it's millennials and Gen Z again, but particularly females aged 25 to 34. For the sweet, getting into the sweeter products for premium chocolates and confectionery, the Vietnamese and the Thais seem to be particularly keen on this. The rest of the region seems to be somewhat similar to the Asia Pacific average and perhaps similar to the global average, not too far behind there. By generation, it's the millennials and the Gen Zs again buying a premium chocolate, particularly females aged 25 to 34. And for ice cream, Vietnamese and Thais seem to prefer premium ice cream. And by generation, it's both the Gen X, the Gen Ys, and the Gen Z. So interested to see the Gen X spending a little bit more in this category. What we found with the deep dive, though, is that it was particularly females. In fact, it was 20% of Asia Pacific females aged 25 to 34 who were keen on ice cream. Notice that the silent generation, much less interested in this. What we found in other parts of our surveys is that the older females, the females in the boomer generation particularly, seem to be wanting to avoid sugar wherever they can, or at least that's what they said. At the same time, it seems that they were also purchasing sugary stuff as well. So what I'm going to do now is just go back to the train ride, go back along the stations of the train ride. I'm going to look at some of the fine food innovation. This is from the GlobalData Intelligence Center, from the Product Launch Analytics, which looks at innovations in new launches. But this time we're looking at innovations along the sensory and indulgence trend, which leads towards fine food purchasing, to see what products are being put out around the world that capture the essence of these trends. So, but for novel and experimental, the first one. So on the left, the Funables. So Ferrara launched a fruit snack brand under the name Funables. What they've done is they've prioritized entertainment on the pack with games such as tic-tac-toe, stickers, and as well as licensing partnerships including Batman and Barbie. Over on the right, Chupa Chops, which is most famous for its lollipops. This is from Perfetti Van Melle. They collaborated with Toyo Beverage to introduce a range of drinks under the Chupa Chops brand. The first one is being strawberry cream milk and cola jelly drink. So the idea is to appeal to both young consumers seeking a novel experience, as well as older consumers who just are interested because they remember the Chupa Chops brand. The next one, for the experience economy. Over on the left, a very interesting concept of insomnia cookies, a hidden cookie lab, speakeasy style. So this goes back to the idea of prohibition when alcohol was banned in the USA in the 1920s, I think it was. A speakeasy style lab hidden behind a bookshelf, requiring a password to enter, so you can then make alternative cookies inside. So a new way to interact with the brand's cookie culture. And over on the right, Presto Resto. So the Presto Resto restaurant on wheels, arriving at consumer doors to give a private dining experience. For ethical luxury, over on the left, 11 Madison Park, the chef and owner has just revised his menu to make it completely free of any ingredients derived from animals. He said, "We are going to redefine luxury as an experience that serves a higher purpose." And over on the right, Haig's Chocolates in Australia, the bean to bar chocolate making country that incorporates Australian native foods and botanicals, exploring how they work with chocolate. For authenticity and heritage, over on the left, Ovant in Australia has got a small batch handcrafted process for alcohol-free distillation. And over on the right, Scotch whiskey Johnny Walker from Scotland, open to the public in this summer. Johnny Walker Princess Street, a visitor experience that enables visitors to customize their bottles, bottle their own exclusive drink, and gives an interactive flavor journey. For premiumization and indulgence, the retailer Target, which is best known really for mass products, has launched a private label line of food and beverages to offer premium flavor at affordable prices. And over on the right, you can have your cake and eat it with whiskey, as Glenmorangie has produced a Tale of a Cake, which is a whiskey designed to be paired with cake. The fresh and natural trend. On the left, Belvedere Poland has produced organic infusion lime made of blackberry and lemongrass with a hint of sage and so on. And over on the right, celebrity-backed plants-powered range for a vegan home care line to bring plant-powered cleaning products to consumers in the US after they have done all their cooking at home. And then finally, the last trend that we're going to look at the innovation in is connoisseurship. Over on the left, Treasury Wine Estates in the UK, delivering a free wine sample alongside Deliveroo orders, Deliveroo Editions restaurant orders. And over on the right, Tripod Coffee Australia. This is an interesting one. I'm looking forward to sampling this. For connoisseurs who want quality coffee without the price tag or the need for heavy duty machinery, they've launched a premium connoisseur instant coffee using a slow brew extraction process. Sounds very interesting indeed. Okay, so summary, what I'm going to do now is just summarize the key trends and opportunities in Southeast Asia for fine food by country. So Singapore is expected to recover first from COVID and experience a jump in tourism sales. It does have strong support for foreign brands, but Singapore consumers say they are less likely to spend on fine foods. This is despite the fact they do have lots of premium retail and food service options. Underneath the Philippines, strong support for foreign brands. They're most interested in premium bakery and cereal. They like trying new flavors in fine dining. They're least likely to prefer premium confectionery and ice cream, which I think is interesting given how they're famous for their love of sugar. Underneath that, for Thailand, they're most interested in premium sweet products, unlike the Filipinos. They also like trying new flavors in fine dining restaurants, but they are least likely to consider themselves foodies. They also like premium deli foods. Over on the top right, Malaysia, most interested in premium bakery and cereals. They like premium seafood, and they have a strong support for premium juice brands. Indonesians, underneath them, most likely to consider themselves foodies and to be interested in trying new flavors. Also most likely to spend more on premium savories and all the proteins, as well as premium coffee brands. The Vietnamese, probably a later recovery from COVID, strong support for foreign brands, most interested in premium sweet products, premium bakery and cereals, as well as premium dairy and seafood. So actually strong support from the Vietnamese for most areas of fine food. And that comes to the end of my presentation. So what I'd like to do now is just go to the end slide and then hand back for any questions and comments from the floor. Thank you all.